Hi, welcome to Swipers Anonymous, the podcast hosted by me, Anna.
And me, Gabby.
We both decided to have this show despite having no online dating experience because, like many of you, we were curious about it.
As a disclaimer, some themes and languages may not be suitable for audiences under the age of 18. The views of the interviewees are not necessarily the views of the hosts and the show. We are not professionals in any way in relationships and the like. Listener discretion is advised.
Due to some privacy concerns, some of our interviewees have requested use of a fictitious name for purposes of this podcast. All right, we hope you enjoy listening as much as we enjoyed recording. Hi, Gabs.
Hey, Banana.
Hey, everyone. So today we are with our friend John. John, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is John. I am Filipino, but I've spent half my life in a Western country that starts with a C and rhymes with Canada. Leave it to the listeners to figure out what
Do
that
you
country
like
is.
maple syrup, John?
I actually do love maple syrup, and I'm out of maple syrup right now, and unfortunately I was planning to visit again during the holidays to get the new stash, but didn't happen because of this thing. There's like have you heard about this virus that's like
There's a virus happening? What's
yeah.
I've been I just got out of my rock like 2 minutes ago, so I have no idea.
Okay. Right. No, see, I got out of the rock 5 minutes before that, so I'm yeah. But if you look at the news, you'll see a little bit about it. It's not a big deal really, but yeah.
It's messing with his maple syrup stash, yo.
Yeah. So I'm here in the Philippines. I've been here for the last 3 years, and been just here for work.
Mhm.
And when I got here, I arrived here single. I guess that could be a good
ready to
starting
mingle.
point. and ready to mingle.
Okay, I guess starting from that, did you online date in your previous country?
I did, yeah. So I think one thing that I've always tried to make a point of in my life was to not be afraid to do the unorthodox. And so when it came to online dating, I'd say compared to, because right now you could say online dating is fairly, if it's not mainstream already, it's almost mainstream. At least in the West, it's quite mainstream already, right?
Yeah.
But I started early. I can't remember what year, but I was doing a lot of interesting experimental things so I like to experiment with data, with optimization of techniques. So I got to really play around with things in that regard when it came to online dating. So that's kind of like how I approached it.
Okay.
So there was some sort of
Interesting.
strategy that you applied.
Yeah. So I guess back then the online dating apps at the time were Plenty of Fish, and OK Cupid was like really brand new. Plenty of Fish had been around for a little bit. I've also tried a bunch of other things that I don't even remember the names of, but the most success I had back in that country was in OK Cupid and Plenty of Fish.
Yeah, so for Anna and I, top of our head.
Top of mind, yeah.
Top of mind.
Yeah,
is
for
just
brands.
Tinder, like whenever you say online dating, you're like, you guys met on Tinder, right?
Yes,
so
it's the first one.
OkCupid it's funny because OkCupid apparently has been around, I think, longer.
Yeah.
Way longer.
But in the Philippines, when you arrived in the Philippines, which one did you end up using?
So I'm actually happily dating someone right now, and I met her in OK
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yep. She's a lovely lady, and love her to bits.
Sorry, ladies. He's got someone.
And,
sorry, yeah.
No, but I did meet her in OK Cupid, and apparently she initially saw me in Tinder before, because I had a bunch of accounts in different places, and she saw me in Tinder before she saw me in OK Cupid, and she swiped is it left if you don't like them? Something like that. So then later on she saw me again on OK Cupid, and she's like, all right, fine, let's see what this guy has. So she swiped right. I think right is, I can't remember. It's been a while.
Yeah, swipe right is yes. Swipe left is no. Yeah, okay.
So we matched on OK Cupid, because actually OK Cupid didn't have the swiping thing for the longest time.
Mhm.
It was
Mhm.
until Tinder made that a mainstream thing that OkCupid started to experiment with it, and it, I guess, really took off. So that's essentially how OkCupid is now really posturing its app. So people, are now swiping.
Okay.
And so
Mm.
yeah, we both swiped, and that's how we met. And there's a bit of a story there too. But yeah, when I arrived here in the Philippines, yeah, I used Tinder for a bit, but so I ended up meeting someone in real life, IRL, and we ended up dating. This is different, right? We ended up dating for about a year and a bit. But it was only after we ended that relationship did I really go like fully back on online dating, and I
Mhm.
really, I guess you could say, maximized it, so to speak.
What does that mean?
Um, so okay, in the past,
Yeah.
let's say back in the old country,
Hmm.
I would do it kind of like on the side as a hobby. I mean, I would do it more of like 10% of my free time,
Okay.
I'd have a lot of other hobbies and a lot of other things that I'd be focused on. But the online
Hmm.
dating wasn't really that big of a thing for me. And whenever I'd work on it, I'd, like to experiment. I'd like to read up on it. I'd like to do all sorts of things. So I guess I'll give you an example of like how I've experimented in
Okay.
different ways.
Okay.
So OK Cupid back then, well, first you could message anybody. You didn't have to match them to message them. Unlike Tinder, you had to match. You have to match your, someone to be able to message them. In
So
OK
it's
Cupid,
still like grind. It was like Grinder because we learned from our
I
past interview that
You could just
Grinders
message
like that. You can
anyone.
just
Yeah.
message. Yeah.
all right. Well, I have no experience with Grinder,
We're not.
but
That's what
I'm
No, sorry. I was just saying
but
based on what I've learned. I'm sorry.
but for the sake of knowledge and discovery
Yeah.
and enlightenment, I'm definitely willing to open up a Grinder account. I probably won't use my real photos. I probably won't use my real name, but
Yeah.
for the sake of
Actually,
just understanding, yeah, I would definitely
no,
use.
that has already happened. One of our interviewees, a girl, said that she opened one so she could understand her gay friends better. Yeah.
That's funny. So what I did before was I opened up a female OkCupid account so I could understand my
Whoa.
competition
Okay.
better.
Really?
Really?
So you
Yeah. So
whose photo did you ask your sister if you could?
no, I found some random pretty girl's photo, and I used it. So okay, this was back in, not in the Philippines. So this is
Yeah.
part of
Yeah.
that whole experimentation, like learning, right? So I did a bunch of
Yeah.
things, a bunch of hacks. So yeah, let's talk about that since we're on it. So I created a profile, and this profile of, a pretty girl with a very, very simple, very empty profile description, right? The
Mhm.
only thing was it had a pretty photo. And it didn't
Okay.
seem like it was like a model or anything like that. It was like a random girl next door who was fairly pretty, just so that it seemed realistic.
Yeah.
And I was surprised at the ton, like the messages I got. There's a ton of them, like a lot of messages. And like, just by having a very simple profile and just one single photo, it got hundreds of messages in a week. And
Oh.
I was like, okay, this is a huge insight because this is really what I'm up against. Like, if I message a girl who is hot or pretty, chances are my message is going to get lost in the flood of all these other guys' messages.
Yeah.
So what I did was I read almost every message that was sent just to understand the types of messages that, were being
Guys are
sent.
sending.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I could understand, the competition.
So do you get
So
any like great messages? Like anything that stood out? I'm just curious.
I can't remember. This was many years ago. There were certainly funny ones, and usually the funny ones were the ones that stood out. So that was an insight. There were many dick pics, so I was like, okay, it's a
Oh
real
my
thing.
God.
Guys actually do send photos of their cocks.
Like that's the first
At the
thing
time,
that's sent. This is not
yes,
some like you guys started talking and then he sends it. It was like the very first thing he sends.
that's right. Either that, or they actually straight up say that I have a big cock, want to see it, or they straight up ask, "Do you want to see my cock?"
Oh my God.
And at the time, I was wondering, like, how does this work? Like, what are they thinking? Like, this
Exactly. Yeah.
cannot work at all. But then many years later, I found out that, okay, say, you're a dude, you go to a nightclub and you ask every single lady that you meet, the first thing you ask them is, wanna fuck? It only takes one girl to say yes.
Yes.
And
Uh-huh.
For you to get
Yeah.
lucky.
and you're good. You have exactly. But the amount of effort it takes is so minimal. So that analogy can be taken into online dating, where
Okay,
if you
yeah.
just flood all the women with, something sexual or something really direct, it can actually, bear results. And if, you really just want to close, yeah, it could work.
Yeah.
So at the time, I didn't realize it, but now it just makes sense. It's a numbers game.
Okay,
it's all about just
Yeah.
it depends on what you want, right? If you really don't care about where you stick your dick in, yeah, that could actually work.
Yeah.
So I found that out, like people were doing that. And I also saw a lot of messages that were very long and very personalized to the profile. And I was also amused because I can't remember exactly what I put in the profile, but it was very sparse. And yet they were creative enough to find ways to craft a message that somehow took that into consideration. Something like, you don't really say much in your profile, but you have a blah, 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 blah. And, so there are guys who actually really, really try their best to write those messages. And I felt kind of guilty because, they didn't know they were messaging a dude. And they spent all that effort, right, crafting that message. And many of them were pretty good, So then in the end, I realized, okay, if I'm a girl and I'm getting hundreds of messages, and it's really hard to stand out. The things that stood out were the funny ones. How do I do something along those lines that first is funny, and second catches my attention so I remember them and they stand out in all the messages? And I also learned at the time that it was very, let me try to formulate my words here. I think messaging a person on online dating, I'm speaking from the perspective of a guy, okay? So I can't speak from the perspective of a woman. But as a dude, messaging a girl with the intention of building a really solid relationship, but through online, is very, very difficult. And so I found that messages that were more lighthearted and not deep would be much better, especially early on. And I say early on because I do know some people who have built strong relationships through long essays exchanged back and forth. So those exist, but they're, I think, a little bit more difficult to attain, at least from my experience. So that was my experience, seeing what I was up against. So now what I ended up doing was I had a profile and I experimented with different openers.
Okay.
And so in fact, like I just brought up a notebook here from way back. I see here October 24th, 2014. Yeah,
you wrote them down first?
I did. So I wrote down different templates of messages. I wrote down different, and then they had categories like funny, direct, etc. And I would just have like placeholders where I would replace it with the name of the profile, etc., etc. So I would just copy paste, and so it's kind of like a mixed numbers game, but at least still a little bit optimized to the person. So for example, for funny, and this was like back then, and these sound really cheesy now, they're probably still cheesy today. They were probably still cheesy back then, but here's kind of one, so I'm going to read it. So do I absolutely have to come up with a corny pickup line to take you somewhere nice, or can I save my best material for our first date? Shit like that, like really cheesy. But, it's funny.
That's not bad. That's actually not bad.
But, I'm going to tell you what actually worked for me, and this is kind of like more recent. This is actually the fun stuff, but this is like back in the day. Another thing I also did back in OK Cupid, which was actually kind of fun, and this actually really worked quite well. So in OK Cupid back then, whenever you'd send a message, you would have to put a subject line and the body of the message. Now, if you looked at the inbox, your inbox, it would not show the full body. It would only show the subject line.
So it's like an email.
Yes, it's like an email. It's different today in OK Cupid because they don't have a need for a subject line anymore. It's just a message, and it's a lot simpler. But back then, they had the subject line. So I was like, okay, so the key is to get them to open the message to begin with, because when I was, with that fake profile and I got all those messages, there were many messages that I didn't even bother opening. Just too many. I'm not going to have time to read every one of them. So really, the key, first and foremost, is to get them to open up the message. And then once they open up the message, the actual message is where you seal the deal, or at least hook them so that they could respond at the very least. And once they've responded, you have that at least initial rapport. But so the subject line. So what I did, I experimented with a lot of different subject lines, but I think the one that really worked best for me was this. So I had my main profile.
Yeah.
And then I created a second profile, and it's a dude with a very different name and whatnot. And the thing
so you catfished? Well, you didn't catfish because you didn't get anything out of it, but you posed as a guy and a different guy and a girl.
So I had three profiles. I'm talking about three profiles now in general. So I had my main profile, and then there was that fake woman's profile,
Yeah.
To be fair, I didn't respond to any dude. Okay, so
Yeah.
so I just really kept it like, because I felt guilty
Just
also.
as data collection. Yeah.
Data
Yeah, of
collection,
course.
exactly. And then I created a third guy profile, But let's so forget about the woman, the female profile for now. Let's
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about
yeah.
my main profile and this fake dude profile. So you know how when you receive emails, it's chronological and the most recent one is on top.
Yes.
Right. So same thing in OK Cupid inbox. So what I did first was I would send a message with a fake dude profile with a subject line in all caps, "Do not open the message above," or something like that. And then I would immediately send a second message of my real profile that says, "No, don't listen to him," or some shit like that, So now if you are opening up your inbox and you see all these random messages, and then you see these two messages and in that order, it's like, first,
Yeah.
how did that dude know that that was a guy who was gonna message me afterwards? So that kind of was an attention grabber.
And it
And
worked?
so it got a lot of people to click on to open up the message. And I can't remember what the actual message I sent was, because I sent different variations of it, right?
Mhm.
But the important thing is, in regards to getting the most amount of responses, that seemed to have worked the best. So
Oh.
so it's about attention grabbing from the very beginning, with the headline. And
Yeah.
here's another thing I also learned, right? When it comes to online dating, the message you send really should primarily do one thing, first and foremost, to get her to click on your profile. And your profile should do one thing, to get her to respond to the message. So it's kind of like how when you send a resume for an interview, you're not sending a resume so that you can get the job. You're sending a resume so that you can get the interview. And the interview
Yeah.
is where you get the job.
Correct.
So same thing, the message should never be with the intention to get her to respond. The message should be to get her to click on your profile, and the profile is where you get her to go, okay, I want to respond. And then when she wants to respond, she looks at the message, and that's where she finds some things to talk about, et cetera, et cetera. But that's kind of like what I learned and how I framed the profile. So I can't remember what the message was, but I definitely made the profile in such a way that it gave a lot of interesting things to talk about, and made it seem like, okay, this person had some interesting stuff about him, and so made it easier for her to respond. That's kind of like the approach I took.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah.
This was the approach you took, regardless of your intention at the time. Like, when I say regardless of the intention, I mean like you weren't, whether you were looking for a relationship at the time or whether you were just looking for a quick hookup. It was always about that. I mean, that was what you would use. That was the strategy you'd use, I suppose.
So yes, but if I were to be honest with everyone, including myself, at the time I
really
didn't know what I wanted, because I just wanted women. if it was a relationship, great. If it was a hookup, great as well.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe at the time I was really looking for just a feminine figure in my life. And maybe I was even afraid to admit to myself that, yeah, going online just for a hookup is fine. Maybe I was afraid to even admit that to myself at the time, right? So it didn't really matter to me. What mattered was, just talking to women, going on dates, and so on.
That's interesting that you say that you didn't want to admit it at the time. Maybe you just wanted to hook up. Do you feel like there's some sort of stigma to like saying that he just wants to hook up with a girl? Or do you feel that there's still some sort of bad implication if a guy just wants to hook up? Like, is that bad in your mind?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And this goes beyond online dating, and it has a lot to do with growing up in a fairly conservative family. I'm Filipino and Asian and so on. And so, I grew up in a very religious school. So you can imagine, how sex education was really religion class. So that was instilled in me for a huge part of my life. So breaking out of that was very difficult. So even, disregard online dating, just the general idea of admitting to yourself that I just want to get laid, admitting to the woman that you're talking to that I just want to get laid. That's something that you would never admit, even if you know. You don't even admit it to her, but you don't even. So it's not that you don't admit it to her. You also don't even admit it to yourself. And that is actually really, really bad, because it is a level of, I guess I can talk about closer to present day where I've managed to kind of overcome that
limitation.
Yeah. But anyway, so before I close out like my experiences back then, I ended up meeting this woman who was really awesome, and she was a self-proclaimed nymphomaniac, so that also was very enticing for me.
Was
because
this
I got
on her profile?
no. It,
Oh,
in
okay.
fact, was not in profile, and something I found out as we were in our first few dates, and this kind of like got me really excited about it. And so, and long story short, we dated for about 2 years ish,
Whoa.
Okay.
and
And
it was good.
I mean, when you say we dated for 2 years, this was not an open relationship. This was like a
Mhm.
relationship.
It was definitely a committed relationship,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
we also did push boundaries in different ways.
Okay.
Mhm.
So this goes outside of online dating, but
Yes.
I guess have experienced things like swingers clubs,
Okay.
like these, yeah, all sorts of things, right?
And you didn't
Not,
use the apps for this.
It
It was
was
all IRL.
so no app, but there
Yeah.
were websites.
Mhm.
A
Ah.
simple search on Google, at least in the city that I was in, showed that there were a number of these special nightclubs. And it's very interesting because you have to register, and in the registration process, you have to put in the profile about
You and your
yourselves.
partner. Yeah.
Yeah, photos. And what's interesting too is the way it worked was women were allowed to go in by themselves. Couples were allowed to go in as well, but individual males were only allowed to show up if they were sponsored by a couple.
Oh.
So
Oh.
yeah. But anyways, going there, I went there a number of times.
Uh-huh.
Such a surreal experience. Very, very interesting. I guess
This
I'm
is my
happy to
first
say that.
Yeah, it's my
Sorry.
first time hearing about it. So yeah, please.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And I guess just to paint a picture of what it is, the first time you're there, you go through an orientation process, you watch a video. Uh, it's like there's this whole
Wow.
production behind it, right? There's a locker room where you get changed, and then you
There are
exit to the main area.
rules. Do
There
they,
are
like, sit
rules,
you
and they
down
have
and
to be
tell you what the
very,
rules are? Yeah.
yes, and they're very strict in it because it's all about
Mhm.
safety, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I'm really appreciative
definitely.
of that. I really appreciate that.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's a whole production. It's a whole, it's really well planned out. Like there are lots of towels and there are baskets full of condoms.
Okay.
Yeah. And we're kind of out of, we're not talking about online dating anymore. So let's get back to that.
Okay, yeah. So
Obviously, we've jumped into the deep end, but like in the beginning, what made you decide, you know what, I'm just gonna try this thing? Because, maybe it might not apply to you, but obviously in the Philippines, like we were saying, Anna and I are trying to break the stigma that it has, right? But
Mhm.
maybe where you were residing at the time, it didn't have that much of a stigma.
yeah,
did
people
it?
seem very open
Yeah.
about stuff.
So,
Yeah.
but like, what made you decide, you know what, I've done the clubbing thing, I've met girls through friends, but this is not working, I'm gonna do online? Was that how it happened, or
Or was it just curiosity too?
yeah.
Like you were just like,
Mhm.
I want to date together.
No, so it was really a mix of curiosity and doing things that I knew many people were not comfortable with doing or open that
Mhm.
to doing. I guess it's just always been in me since I was a kid to always be the person who's willing to do things that many people
try.
Mhm.
would find not socially acceptable. And having done that as a kid, and not just got away with it, but actually benefited from it, I guess I brought that with me throughout my adulthood.
Yeah.
So this would be, I guess, part of it where I was willing to do things that people were not really willing to do so at the time. So I said early on, that's when I started doing online dating. And this was even before it became more mainstream in the West.
Mm-hmm.
So now that I'm back here in the Philippines, it's kind of like I've gone back in time where it's still not mainstream. And
Yeah.
yet I'm a lot more, you could say,
Comfortable with it.
comfortable with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
So-
how does it compare, I guess,
Yeah.
between the West and here? Like, what differences have you noticed?
It's definitely a lot more conservative here in regards to, okay, here. I can honestly say that I do have an advantage over the vast majority of people over here. The main thing really is that I have had experience and I'm more comfortable with the online dating flow. And so
Yeah.
I'm better at it compared to the vast majority
You've
of,
done your research. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
that's right, yeah. And there's a bit of a hard mode back in the West. Let's say the efforts I do here in the Philippines may already be done by a lot of guys in the West.
Mm-hmm.
And so over here, by doing the things I do in online dating, it's easier for me to stand out compared to if I were to do what I'm doing, do what I did here back in the West.
Yeah.
So,
Mhm.
okay, so now let's talk about my experience here. So when
Yeah.
my first relationship ended, I really had a bit of fun. I put a bit more effort in creating a good profile. So I didn't really use Tinder much back in the other country. Only here in the Philippines did I do so, right? And so I had to kind of relearn a lot of things. So for example, I didn't have the benefit of like the subject lines or long messages, and you couldn't even message people unless you matched them. And so whereas before it's all about getting a really good subject line to get them to click on it, over here it's all about the photos. And that's a lot more difficult to optimize or achieve because whereas words can elicit emotions and you can easily control the words you use, photos are worth 1,000 words or so it's a lot more difficult to elicit emotion from the person seeing the photo. And what's also interesting is the word emotion. I use the word emotion because I really think that's the key thing when it comes to getting your reaction. So emotion is a drug. I've learned that emotion, even if it's bad emotion, it's something that people remember more than many other things. And so if you could elicit some emotion, then you already have an advantage over other people. And this is not just in online dating, this is just in life in general. And so taking that and a lot of the experience I've had, I really put a lot of effort now in the photos. I spent a lot of time making sure I got good photos and so on, because that's really the number one, the first step. And once you got that down, the next thing would be the opener or the message. So the photos and then the message, and then after the message, the profile, and then that's when they decide to respond to you.
So did you find it a little more difficult, I guess, here or challenging in that regard?
Yes and no. Difficult in that it is all about the photos, but easier in that messaging them or the opener actually ended up being simpler for me. And I could share some of the opener messages I've used, some of them that actually really work. Some of them are really fun, but
take notes, boys.
yeah. But what I learned was, you know how I created a fake female profile back then? I didn't do so this time, especially because it's tied to your Facebook profile. So it's a bit more difficult. But I had a friend who was actively on Tinder, and I got to see the types of guys that she was matching with and she was seeing. And she's fairly good looking, actually. So you know how Tinder has an algorithm that matches people who match in the same scale of good lookingness or beauty. Are you guys familiar with that?
No.
I mean, Tinder has this thing where they match good looking people with good looking people. They match not so good looking people with not so good looking people. That is correct, yes.
So wait, how do they identify good looking people? Like, is it
by the number of
symmetry
swipes?
Of face? Oh, okay.
Oh.
That's right.
So the longer you're on it, the quality changes? Is that what you mean?
Yes. So Tinder has some scaling or some metric that they keep in their databases for each person that represents, I guess, put simply, how good they look. Again, it's probably a lot more complicated than what I'm saying, but generally speaking, everyone has a rank. And of course, if you are a very good looking woman, Tinder is not going to waste your time by showing you ugly men. It's going to prioritize good looking guys. And vice versa, if you're a good looking guy, they're not going to waste their time showing you ugly women. They're going to show you good looking women. And the same can be said in the people who are unfortunately not as good looking. And again, I know good looks is subjective, but based on Tinder's
it's a numbers game.
It is a numbers game, yes. And so I was looking at her profile, and she matched a lot of good looking people, but majority of these good looking people were actually from outside of the Philippines. And they had really good photos. They had really awesome profiles. Like, wow, I would date them if I were a dude, if I were a chick rather. So, but one thing I realized, and I'm going to generalize here, okay? So don't take this, so take it as that. What I've found was when a woman looks at a man, and feel free to disagree, please, okay? Guys, but when a woman looks at a man, there are generally two check boxes that need to be checked. The first one is, and this is all subconscious, this is all biologically driven, by the way. This all happens without people even realizing it. So the first box is, do they have good genetics or good genes? Like if I were to mate with them, is the child I'm going to bear going to be healthy and fit?
Kind of like what pheromones are based on.
Yeah. So again, you can see it's biological, right?
Correct.
The second criteria is, will they stick around and help me raise this child? Okay, so are they a good provider? Are they a person who can actually attain the necessary resources in order to help me support the child, as well as not leave not abandon me.
Yes.
And this, I guess, goes back to the three primal objectives of any biological animal, which is survival. That's number one. Number two is to procreate. And number three is to protect the offspring. So those three objectives are generally ingrained in every living being. And so taking that, when it comes to what women seek in men, it's those two things. Now, in the past, back, say, when we were hunter-gatherers, typically the most fit person would be the person who is also best at hunting animals,
Correct.
best at foraging, best at crafting things that are necessary to survive. So the physically fit was also the person who was best positioned to provide. And you could find both of them in one person. But today, it's kind of split where you could have a really fit guy who is just not doing anything with his life. And you could have a very successful computer genius who's just not fit at all. And so that's kind of a dilemma that many women have. So coming back to this friend of mine, excuse me.
Good thing
By the way,
Chris
if you guys
Hemsworth
have
can
any...
do both for me.
That's right.
Chris Hemsworth. Oh my God.
Wait, and by Chris Hemsworth, are you literally referring to him or
Yes, of course.
your guy? Oh, okay,
Chris Hemsworth.
okay.
Hello, Chris Hemsworth. I hope you're listening.
I will meet him and it will be the most embarrassing day of my life because I talk about him a lot.
Well, anyway, so if you guys have any thoughts, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and your perspective on what I just said, if there's any.
I mean, no, that makes sense. But
It
I
does.
guess in that sense, like, what about for guys? What is the
Yeah.
flip side? Yeah.
That is
I'm
good.
sorry to hear this, but unfortunately for guys, it's just about the looks. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it, but it's all about
Which is funny
again,
because the girls were the ones who are more willing to say, I look at a guy's profile picture first, and if I find him attractive, then I swipe right. And
or then she reads the profile. Yeah.
Swipe and then read. But if I don't find him attractive, then what's the point? It's just a waste. But the guys we've been interviewing have been a bit more coy, I suppose, about saying that, or maybe they don't.
Maybe there are some guys, who are like, I want conversation.
Maybe we just happen to be interviewing guys who aren't like that, right? But
maybe. I mean, what I just said is a generalization for sure. There are guys who are really in it for the sapiosexuals, or people who are really in it for the connection, intelligence. And I think even for the long term, like there's a term called pair bonding. That's when a guy and girl really form a bond for the long term. And that's what I have with my girlfriend right now. And that typically starts first with
attraction,
the primal attraction of looks and beauty. But then to maintain that usually entails the other aspects, which would be intelligence, connection, common belief,
grounds,
common grounds, etc. But from in the very beginning, it really is unfortunately about looks. Again, generalization. And I also would have to say that there are some guys who are living in self-denial, and so they tell themselves, and they even believe it, that no, it's not just about the looks, it's about the connection. But I bet you if a girl who's really hot decides to message them, they're going to message right back right away.
Gabbs, because Chris Hemsworth story.
So there's no denying it. Like, for example, if a woman who's really hot, but then her profile is kind of like, the guy's still going to respond. This is still going to happen. So,
I mean, what do you lose, right? I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Worst case scenario, some girl that you've never met who's super hot doesn't reply to your first message or your second, and that's it. Like, that's what also we've been learning, right? People are a bit more ganado to just message. They have more confidence, or they don't see themselves as brave. They just feel like they have nothing to lose, because at the end of the day, it's not like they lose face in person. It's just
a little bit of pride, but not.
I did want to add a bit of nuance there. There are also a lot of guys who do see girls' profiles who are really, really attractive, and because of a lack of self-confidence, they're afraid to even deal with the feeling of, oh, she didn't respond to me. And so they don't even try. They don't even respond.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of guys who are in that boat. Like, why even bother messaging her? She's too hot for me. Again, this is mostly subconscious, but it's a real thing. But yes, it's definitely a numbers game. There are several guys who realize that, so they're like, sure, whatever.
But like in Bumble or OK Cupid, what we've been learning is if the girl doesn't swipe back, like let's say you don't match, then you don't get to speak to her anyway. So if the
in Bumble, she has to message first.
Yeah, but
That's true.
but that means she at least made the first swipe back, right? That means that you matched.
Yes.
So what would
you're
stop
absolutely
them
right.
then? Yeah. If the girl already said, yeah, actually, this one's interesting. Okay, I'm going to swipe. That's the first step. So the guy must know or have some sort of clue that
that there's some mutual interest
yeah,
there.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. I completely forgot about the mechanic involved.
But so I guess I wrote down a few things like while you were talking, and one of them is like, don't get me wrong, you said something along the lines of if you're gonna stick your dick in it.
I know,
it reminded me of a question. No. It reminded me of a question that Anna and I always bring up, which is how do you stay safe? Like, given the fact that you have mentioned that you've done your fair share of like
adventure,
messing around. How do you stay safe, not just with protection and whatnot, but how do you weed out the weirdos? Do you have like experience with somebody who was super off?
A
you met
psychopath.
Them how do you stay safe in general?
Fortunately, I've never found myself in a position where I met a girl who's just so weird that I had to book it.
Yeah.
I mean, I like weird girls. I mean, sorry, not that I purposely seek them out, but it interests me. And so if a girl is weird in a peculiar way, that actually keeps me interested. I just haven't met a girl who's just very, not weird, but strange, maybe would be the better word. Because there's a difference between weird and strange, at least in my definition.
Yeah.
Strange would be like, why would you do that? But weird would be like, okay, that's it. You're quirky. You're doing something that not many people do. So that one I'm okay with. I think if I end up meeting a girl who's just really strange or off, I would probably find ways to end it. But again, I have not experienced that, fortunately.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, I did want to kind of go back to my friend's experience with Tinder. So she got a lot of messages from guys who were from out of the country. And these are good-looking people, great profiles. And yet it didn't seem like she was very happy with them. And that kind of made me realize that they may fulfill the first bit, which is, great genetics, interesting people who look great and whatnot, maybe good for a bang or something like that. But the second factor, which was, are they going to be there to stick around to help raise a child if there is, even though that's all subconscious, even though, she may not necessarily be thinking about getting a child, that's still definitely part of the subconscious decision-making process. And because many of them were not from the country and they were planning to visit, but they were just looking for a lay, it didn't really interest her. And I think it depends on where a person is in their lives. In her case, it just so happens that, she wasn't really looking for the fling, the one-night stand. But I'm 100% certain that there are tons of women who definitely bit that bait, right? So that's kind of what I found. But ultimately, that also helped me understand the quote-unquote competition, so to speak, here in the Philippines.
With online dating, there's some sort of anonymity, right? Like, I mean, there's a picture, there's a profile, but it's not like, again, you're not face-to-face. Do you feel like women in the Philippines who supposedly are more, Maria Clara, are a bit more forthcoming or a bit more aggressive online, or is it the same?
So I really think it depends. I've met women in both spectrums, and I think I came up with a really good opener that allowed me to figure what type of woman I was talking to early on.
That's a good one. Go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually here, you know what? Depending on who listens to this, I bet a lot of guys may end up using this. So all right, it goes something like this. I sent a message, and the first message goes like, do you prefer sunny side up or scrambled eggs? That's it.
What?
Okay.
Yeah. So exactly.
Anna, I want you to make a mental note of your answer, okay? I want you to make a mental note.
Yeah, I have it.
Answer.
I got it. I got it.
It really.
Hey, you gotta do it too.
It really doesn't matter ultimately what the answer is, okay? But so I asked him, do you prefer scrambled eggs or sunny side up? And it doesn't matter what the answer. Let's say scrambled eggs.
Yeah.
And then sometimes they ask why, but if they don't, I follow it up with all right, and with that, do you prefer corned beef or Spam? And then
okay, food,
breakfast.
I'm a vegetarian. No, I'm just kidding.
Food.
Go on.
Well, see, I filtered you out already because
No, I'm not a vegetarian. I'm joking.
So, well, I guess if I were a vegetarian myself, I would somehow substitute that with something else that was more friendly to my
yeah.
But okay, so
frittata.
Wow, I wish I could make that. But all I have is eggs and corned beef or Spam. So I ask corned beef or Spam, and she responds with whatever her answer is.
Yeah.
Or maybe sometimes the more creative ones, and I've encountered this, would go like, none of the above. How about, and then they, provide their own suggestion, So I'd already kind of find out what type of woman that person was, right? If they were kind of like more interesting, they would usually be playful with that kind of banter.
Okay.
But this is the third message I send is usually where this whole thing leads to. So at this point, they usually go, why do you ask? And this is when I go, oh, just planning what to cook us for breakfast the morning after our first date. Wink, and with a little... Actually, so I usually use an emoji, which is the little devil with a naughty smile, as well as another emoji with a crying thing coming out that's smiling. So by that last message, that kind of puts them in a position of, okay, how do I respond to this? And depending on how they answer,
unmatched. No.
And I have experienced that.
Next.
I have experienced that. But that has been the minority of all my matches. Because the interesting thing about that is it's still innocent enough that women, actually, I found that many women are, again, generalizing here. Please correct me if you feel differently. Many women, similar to how guys are here in the Philippines, are also afraid to admit to themselves that they also want to get laid or want to date or want to
sow their oats.
Guys. Yes.
Yeah. No, so they're kind of waiting to see what the other person is thinking, and you're trying to provide that platform.
Opportunity to do
so.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
No, yeah, that makes sense.
And even if you offer that opportunity, many of them are still afraid to appear like they're a slut.
Or to broach it. Right? Yeah.
I mean, like, I think that it's socially conditioned in almost every culture that being looked at as a slut or someone who sleeps around is a bad thing. And there are a number of women already, especially in the West, who are, fuck that, I don't care about that anymore. I'm liberated and, I'm free. But especially in Asia, that's kind of like the thing that they really want to avoid, and they don't even realize that. And so they do everything they can to appear like I'm a prim and proper person. You're talking things that would never be okay with me.
Yeah.
But really subconsciously they like it.
I have a really important question, a follow-up question to that.
Sure.
Do you cook them the breakfast that you've asked them about?
Yeah, he's got to have some good follow-through with that.
Yeah, you got to cook that breakfast, man.
Well,
do you?
Anna and Gabbie, I do. And I cook a mean breakfast, and I always follow through. So 100%.
Okay.
So anyways, that really
whoever is listening, make it difficult, make it hard, make it like a really good breakfast, like eggs
I want a souffle,
or
I guess this also kind of like leads to the whole idea that when it comes to serious relationships, or any relationship for the matter, but this also includes serious relationships. I truly believe that a very successful serious relationship still needs to begin with some physical relationship of sorts.
No, yeah.
Right? And so if you were to somehow get to that as fast as you can, as soon as you can, I mean, of course, do it in an honorable way. And when I say honorable, I mean by being honest, by being vulnerable, by not doing anything sneaky or tricking people. Safe,
honest and safe. Yeah.
If you're able to attain the physical relationship early on, that makes a good foundation for the long-term relationship. And this is based on my experience, based on my research, based on understanding, I guess, human psychology, and so on and so forth. So this opener actually is really good in that it already establishes that, hey, I'm not one to necessarily be afraid of talking about sex. I'm not afraid to be sexual, really. And if you are willing to engage with me in that level as well, then we have something going on. And if you're not willing to engage with me in that level, so for example, if you unmatch me or if you decide to just not let anything come about from this, which also has happened, then for me, I'm saving time because I'm not wasting my time with someone who's not willing to engage me in that level. Because for me, I want to engage someone from the very beginning on a physical capacity.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't like to beat around the bush by talking about what's your favorite color, what's your, those very shallow things. I don't like that at all. I like to actually go have deep relationships with people, and that also includes physical.
What would your advice be depending on what you're looking for? Like, let's say if you were really looking for a relationship, is there any advice you could give both men and women? Like, what to avoid saying, what to avoid doing? Like, in your experience, if they said something, would it turn you off immediately? Or, of course, this is still very subjective, right? It's not an objective, but like, is there any advice you'd give people about online dating in general?
Okay, so I think my advice goes not just online dating, but just also dating in real
Mhm.
life in general. And this is specific to guys because I've spent a lot more time thinking from that perspective. So there's a book that I highly recommend. It's called Models. It's by Mark Manson. Maybe you guys have heard of that book.
No, I haven't. Okay.
So the book is called Models. There's a full title to it. Models attract women through honesty.
Okay.
So the premise is this. Actually, let me backtrack back again when I was in that other country. Early on, when I started, really taking the idea of dating women seriously, I actually dove into the realm of pickup artistry. And so I've read books like Neil Strauss's The Game. That's kind of like one of the earliest. And I've really tried to understand different perspectives from different dating coaches. And the one thing that really I think worked the best was by a guy named David D'Angelo. Why? Because most, if not all, the pickup artists at the time were focusing on tactics, on lines, on things to say that would get them to react in a certain way. They worked from a shallow point of view, but they were not sustainable. They didn't really form good, long-lasting relationships. Whereas David D'Angelo's approach was about really working on yourself first, being the best man that you could be, and as a byproduct of that, women will come to you. And I really like that approach because he was not afraid to talk about the sexual nature of men and women and the dating side of things. But at the same time, it was still focused on the idea of self-improvement, being masculine, being the best person you can be in terms of your career, in terms of fitness, and so on. And so that also drove into the idea of being honest with yourself and being congruent and not being insecure, pretty much. And so fast forward to now, Mark Manson, Attract Women Through Honesty, would be the latest. So Mark Manson used to be a pickup artist. And then same thing where he learned that all these lines were just not sustainable and so on. And so he wrote this book based on his understanding of the best way to really approach women that made it so that everybody was happy, not just the guy, but also the woman. And the idea is to be very honest and vulnerable and speak your mind. So for example, this actually happened to me. I was on a date and I was with this woman who actually, she's the girl I'm dating right now. So funny enough, this example pertains to her. But when we were still dating, I really thought that she had nice eyes. So we were sitting down and I noticed it. Now, the old me would be super shy to say that because it's kind of like I was really a torpid guy back in the day, right? So I was really afraid to speak my mind about to girls and to be honest with them about how I felt. But in this case, I was like, you know what? I really like your eyes. It's super simple, really straightforward. It's honest, and I didn't expect.
It wasn't flattery because it was honest. Yeah,
exactly. Because if you say something that is flattery,
they can pick up on that. Yeah,
absolutely. And here's the other important thing too. There's a term in models called outcome independence. What that means is you are independent of the outcome. That means you don't care if they like it, if they hate what you have to say. You just say it anyways because ultimately you are honest and you're not trying to be sneaky or anything like that. So by being outcome independent and first and foremost, if you develop yourself in a way that you're actually comfortable with your own skin and you're not afraid of other people finding out who you really are, then you can be honest. And you can also not be afraid of what people think, because if they end up not liking you for who you are, then fuck it. I guess so be it. Unless there's really something about you that's not good in general, in which case please work on yourself for sure, right?
Reevaluate.
Which goes back to rule number one, which is fix yourself first. Get your shit in order. Yeah.
And actually on that note, there's a saying that I absolutely hate and I grew up with. The saying is just be yourself. Now, yes, it's good to be yourself, but if yourself is shit, then don't be yourself and fix yourself until yourself is much better. You know what I mean?
Best self. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I grew up thinking that, and why won't they accept me for who I am? But that's really a not a good way of doing it. You want to keep improving yourself so that you can actually be yourself in a way that you are comfortable with and okay with other people not just liking but also hating. So just being honest, being vulnerable. And the term he also uses here is you need to be okay with, figuratively speaking, putting your balls on a chopping block. So by actually being vulnerable, by saying things that might end up getting you rejected, that's what you need to do. And honestly, rejection, again, this is one of those things that's always said, but it's really difficult in practice. Getting rejected is not a big deal.
Yeah.
When I was younger, I'd hear that phrase all the time, but I was still deathly afraid of rejection, so I wouldn't even try, right? But honestly, you got to just keep doing it and get rejected, and you'll find out that, you know what, it's really not a bad thing. And in fact, by being rejected a lot, you gain more experience, so you can eventually not get rejected.
So
that's good life advice.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I think one of the best things also is, whereas in the past, whenever I date, I'd always go, okay, what if she finds out who I really am? And it led me to live according to what would make her attracted to me.
Yeah.
And that definitely was not honest. I felt, I mean, this is all hindsight, right? At the time, I didn't know it. But now I'm looking back and I wasn't really honest. It was uncomfortable. I was living like I was hiding something. It's always, like when you're hiding a lie, it's really, really uncomfortable and difficult, right? But now, because I'm upfront, because I tell the truth, because I say what I mean, I don't have anything to hide, and it's a lot more liberating. And if the girl does not like what you have to say, what you have to say really is bad. By saying
opportunity
like,
for self-reflection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if, for example, I like to beat up little kids, and she gets offended, then obviously there's something wrong with you, and you have to change it, right? But then if what you say is completely rationally okay, like you're being honest about it. So for example, in all my dates, I pretty much straight up admitted that, I'm seeing other women, I'm dating around. And, that's being honest. It's sometimes uncomfortable for the person to hear it, but they would appreciate it. And if they don't like that, then that's fine with them. But in many cases, I think they've appreciated that honesty. And so by being honest and yet they respond in a negative way, then either you guys are really not meant to be together, or maybe there's just something wrong with their perspective. Either way, it's still something that's not going to work for you. But really, by being straight up honest, it can give you the best results. But it takes a lot of guts, a lot of really building your comfort level with yourself to get to that state.
Yeah, and liking yourself. If you like who you are,
yes.
then it shouldn't really affect whether this girl likes you or not. At least you like yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I think to sum it all up, it's interesting how, like in the very beginning when I started online dating, I was approaching it from a very methodological way and trying to really learn different tactics, different things, and so on. But then in the end, it all boiled down to just being honest, being vulnerable, and being me. Right. So that was a very interesting journey, at least from my experience.
Yeah, I can see the arc there. It was like you started with understanding what you were getting yourself into and sort of figuring out what you wanted to do and how to win, I guess. And then you realized it's just, for lack of better cliche, yourself.
With the nuance that we talked about. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
So, all right, guys, have a good night.
All right.
All right, bye, guys.
Bye. Swipers Anonymous is a Mighty Media production. Our theme song is by Ian Amane, sound and production by Luis Cruz.
If you have questions, want to reach out, or want to be on the show, or just want to chat, contact us at milotiberiusmedia@gmail.com. That's MILOTIBERIUS media. milotiberiusmedia@gmail.com.